Good day, everyone. My name is Angel Micah D. Campos, and I will be discussing the assessing language domain, focusing on assessing students' content knowledge and language proficiency, and culture and language assessment. But first, let's have our objectives. So, these are our objectives for today. And now, let's proceed. Assessing students' content knowledge and language proficiency. So, assessing students' content knowledge and language proficiency has long been a complex issue in education. Traditionally, language proficiency and content knowledge have been considered separate constructs in assessment. From a content assessment perspective, language proficiency has been seen as a potential obstacle. So, language assessment background or subject knowledge has been viewed as a form of bias, potentially influencing a test takers' ability to demonstrate their language skills. But despite this, language and content knowledge are deeply connected, especially in the real world context. Now let's define what is content knowledge and language proficiency. Content knowledge refers to the understanding of facts, concepts, theories, and principles related to specific subject or discipline. So example, in mathematics, we have it focuses on solving. So content knowledge focuses on whether the students understand the subject matter rather than how well they use language to express their understanding. While language proficiency refers to a person's ability to use language effectively and accurately in different contexts, where this includes the skills such as listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as well as grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Example: for students, language proficiency determines how well they can understand, communicate, and express ideas in a given language. So this is actually often assessed through standardized tests such as CFR with levels A1 to C2. Students' ability to perform well in any content-based test depends on their ability to understand and use language effectively. Similarly, a language proficiency test does not involve some level of topical or content knowledge may not truly reflect a student's ability to use language in real world context. So we have the growing of importance of language content integration. The need to better understand this relationship become evident around the 1990s because there is a rise of bilingual education and content-based instruction, or the CBI. So in the USA, about 10% of school-age children are classified as English language learners, and we all know that English is our lingua franca, and the content and language integrated learning, or the CLIL movement in Europe, promotes teaching academic subjects in a foreign language. So typical English showed this become their second language in case. And lastly, the rise of English medium universities, EMOS, globally has further emphasized the need for integrated assessment strategies. So basically, this implies that language content is growing, which means that students can learn, example, English, even though, or a specific language, even though they are in a non English speaking country. So we have the challenges in current assessment practices. So despite the increasing recognition of language content link, most assessment systems still treat them as a separate constructions. Yeah, we have here the according to Wilkinson et al., he noted that assessment policies have largely ignored the fact that many students and educators operate in a language that is not their mother tongue. So this means that in teaching a subject matter or a specific subject, their mother tongue isn't used in teaching that language. Rather, another language was used in teaching that specific language or specific content. So there is an emerging research suggests that assessment methods should have moved beyond traditional models or consider integrated approaches that assess both language and content knowledge simultaneously. So the evolving field continues to shape language assessment policies, teaching methodologies, and evaluation system worldwide, where it actually emphasized that the need for assessments that fairly measure both the skills and subject mastery. So in an early development, Content-based instruction or CBI changed the landscape of language teaching by shifting the focus from communication in general to content as a context for language learning. So in language teaching it marked a major shift from teaching language in isolation to using content as a context for language learning. So this approach became particularly significant in bilingual education programs where students were expected to learn academic subjects while simultaneously developing language proficiency. And according to Short, he emphasized that students should be placed in a regular academic curricula before achieving full proficiency in the language because waiting until they are fluent would put them at risk of failing behind in school, struggling in their classes, or even failing to their grade. Short 1993 suggests that alternative assessment methods can allow for more comprehensive evaluating of students' progress, and this includes alternative assessment includes a skill checklist, reading, writing inventory, student self-evaluation, portfolios, performance-based tasks, and many more. Short suggests that assessments should still focus on a single objective at a time, either measuring content knowledge or language proficiency, rather than doing them both. Now, language for specific purpose teach testing or LSP examines how language is used in professional and specialized fields such as healthcare, aviation, education, and many more fields. So, the key debate in LSP assessment is whether tests should focus solely in language skills or incorporate this with their subject specific knowledge as part of the evaluation. So there are two arguments in LSP from Davis and Douglas. So Davis argued that LSP tests should primarily assess how well individuals use language in different contexts rather than their subject knowledge, while Douglas 2005 countered that LSP tests must include both language proficiency and background knowledge to be valid. So Davis' arguments focus on language use in context. He argued that the LSP should, primarily evaluate how well individuals use language in different professionals or academic settings rather than sa subject matter. The goal of this test, according to Davis, is to ensure that ang individual daw, they can communicate effectively in their field kesa sa ilahang knowledge sa kanang field. But Douglas countered nga, the LSP test should not just, should not ignore the background knowledge or the prior knowledge of the individual because language is used differently across fields. And he also stated that professionals must demonstrate both linguistic proficiency and domain-specific language to effectively function in their, workplace. Next, we have the content and language assessment of ELS in school. So, content and language assessment focus on testing and accountability in many countries around the world has resulted in more assessments of students, including those learning in a second or additional language. So, according to the No Child Left Behind, it required that all students, including the ALS or English language learner, had to be assessed in the content areas of English language arts, mathematics, and sciences. Content language link and content assessment. So the main challenge in assessing the English language learners in the content areas in English had been the score interpretation. So this question has been evolving. When you're evaluating, of course, there must be a score to um, have an interpretation. So does the score on a content assessment represents the student's content knowledge, or does it represent their ability to read, understand, and respond to questions in English? So an English language learner student taking a science test may understand the concept but must struggle siya sa complex vocabulary which mag-lead siya sa lower score nga mao daw ang mag-represent sa knowledge sa bata. But according to Abedi 2004 argues that language is a major source of test bias for English language learner. But some studies show that complex linguistic features in test questions make the assessment harder for English language learners, even though when they understand the subject matter. So to address this, there are na mga accommodation bitaw nga na-introduce, like simplifying language in test items, providing bilingual glossaries, translations, uh, which allows this to, mas makasabot ang mga students or mga learners sa test. So, early research on the English Language Proficiency or ELP test found that the language assessed in these tests did not always match and the academic language students needed to succeed in school. So, there is a major shift in the English Language Proficiency Assessment and abot around 2004 where these new standards were introduced or were a new standards rather were introduced. So ang old nga ALP standard primarily focused on basic communication skills and were aligned closely with the English language arts, while the new English language proficiency standards, according to WIDA and TESOL, expanded the definition of English proficiency to include both social instructional language and academic language across four key content areas, where this involves the language arts, science, mathematics, and social studies. Now we have the role of content in English language proficiency assessment. So this study focused on the lower proficiency students. Like domain general language was more important, but the higher proficiency students or domain specific language played in a bigger role, which suggests that as students become more proficient in English, mas mo ang ilahang content knowledge mas mo mix up bitaw sa ilahang own language to make them, but according ani kay it's hard for them daw to separate these two, but you know as educators and tests ang maghimo sa test, they must carefully balance language and content to ensure that there is an accurate assessment for English language learners' abilities. Now, English language proficiency or ELP standards have traditionally adapted to content areas. Now, content standards are integrating language demands requiring new approaches to support English language learners. So, the understanding of this could actually promote the idea that language is an active tool for learning content rather than a separate skill. But however, there are two consortia developing on the English language proficiency that are aligned to the new content standards, and these are the RIDA, revise its standards and its assessment access for all. So yeah, these revised standards still link language proficiency to social and instructional. So in a K to 12 education, there is a limited research on how this academic language develop interacts with the content learning for both English language learners and mga native speakers. So the lack of research makes it difficult to clearly define kung unsa gyud ang boundaries between language proficiency and the content knowledge, which is crucial for having that accurate assessment and diagnosis of students' learning challenges since many education systems require these constructs to be separately um, assessed and understanding where language difficulties and content difficulties begin is essential for effective teaching and assessment strategies. And lastly, we have the future directions of assessment. So new task types and advances in technology may allow us to better understand the language content and develop assessments that assess content and language in an integrated way, of at the same time that allowing for some separation of these two constructs. So first we have the integrated task. So new assessments like the TOEFL IBT require students to use multiple language skills in reading, listening, or writing. So this approach can be adapted to assess both language and content knowledge simultaneously. And also we have the scenario-based and simulation-based assessment. So these interactive tasks assess not only subject knowledge, but also how students use language in real-world academic contexts. And lastly, we have the technology enhanced scaffolding, found that adding scaffolding questions, guided prompts in language tests improve English language learners' performance. So, basically, similar to scaffolds can be incorporated into simulation-based assessments to support students at different proficiency levels. So, in future assessments, there are moving towards the technology driven, since right now we are in a technology era. So they're driven to have that interactive tools to evaluate both content mastery and language use. So by integrating scaffolding and real-world applications, these assessments can provide better insights into students' learning and fairer evaluation for English language learners. Now let's go to the part two. We have the culture and language assessment. Oops, I'm sorry. Now, what is culture and language assessment? Cultural and language assessment refers to the process of evaluating how cultural understanding and intercultural skills develop alongside language learning. So, this actually recognizes that language and culture are deeply connected, and that learning a language also involves learning the values, beliefs, and ways of communication associated with it. Considering the assessment of cultures in the learning of languages, including the recent interest in assessing intercultural practices and capabilities, language learning and refers to how cultural knowing or cultural or intercultural understanding is assessed in the context of learning languages. So, in a lesser extent, the role of culture or the influence of the culture where these multiple languages are in play, where students are or becoming multilingual. So, with the influence of other cultures, students become multilingual, and we have this thing that we call intercultural competence. So, what is intercultural competence and intracultural competence? Intercultural competence refers to the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately with people from different cultural backgrounds. So, this actually involves understanding and adapting to the diverse cultural norms, beliefs, and communication style while maintaining respect and avoiding misunderstanding. While intracultural competence refers to the ability to navigate, understand, and engage effectively within one's own culture environment. So this involves recognizing regional and social differences within a single culture and responding appropriately. Since students comes from a diverse cultural backgrounds, their learning and assessment are influenced by their social and linguistic experiences. So there is a shift from monolingual model, like one language to one culture, to multilingual approaches that recognizes the interplay of multiple languages and cultures in education. When we say multilingual, this is many languages. So traditionally, monolingual models assume that each language was tied to a single distinct culture, where this approach often overlooked the fact that many students could actually grow up in a multilingual and multicultural environments. So, in a monolingual model, an English teacher might require students to think and write only in English, discouraging the use of their first language. However, in a multilingual approach, the teacher encourages students to use their home languages as a bridge to learning English. Example, a Spanish speaking student learning English struggles with the past tense. So instead of forcing them to, memorize the rules of English, the structures of English, the students will allow the teacher will allow the students to compare a specific word to their own language to another language, which this will help them um, grasp the understanding of the specific or the particular language. So yeah. Now we have the early development. On an early development culture, it actually plays a crucial role in learning or in language learning and assessment. So it was said that language learning and assessment in culture has two dimensions, and these are the culture as substance and culture as medium. So, culture as substance refers to the learning about the culture as part of language education. So, When we learn a foreign language, this means that we could also learn about their customs, traditions, communication styles, fashion styles, and many more that associates in their language. While culture medium as medium highlights that language is learned within a cultural context influencing how people acquire and use language. Example, an ESL student in the US might struggle with classroom interactions American because American schools encourage direct questioning and debate. But sa ilahang culture, it's different because they are, they're from more like reserved communication styles in their home culture rather than directly asking questions. Now we have language and culture. Foreign language education culture has been viewed as a factual knowledge like literature, customs, or social behaviors of specific groups. So, however, this perspective, presents a static view of culture, ignoring individual variations and the learner's identity. So, a more modern approach to this sees culture as a dynamic system of social norms and practices that actually shape through language use. So, this is also where the communicative competence was introduced as a social and interactive view of language that emphasize the grammatical, sociolinguistic discourse, and strategic competence. But according to Holiday, he further explained that he further explained the culture through context of situation and context of culture, showing that language and culture are inseparable in meaning making. So, so communicative competence became interactional competence, and so when we say interactional competence, it is the shared of cultural understanding or the shared of culture. So language and culture are fundamental to learning as they shape how knowledge is created, shared, and understood. So in classroom, learning occurs through interactions between teachers and students influenced by their linguistic and cultural background. So having an interaction with your peers or colleagues are nakadepende siya sa your cultural background or social linguistic sa isa ka tao. Now we have the ongoing conceptualization of communicative competence toward intercultural competence. So there is a recent work where Cramsh has expanded further the constructs of communicative competence and interactional competence, which he termed into a symbolic competence, where symbolic competence refers to the meaning making, but not just for the meaning, but as an informational exchange, but as a process of exchange in cultural meaning, including its perspective. So um, it actually entails the use of language to negotiate and exchange meanings in a particular culture. So the context is not fixed or given, but created the interaction through the intentions, assumptions, and expectations of participants. And we have the assessing intercultural competence. Gramsci 2009 argues that symbolic competence, the ability to interpret and create meaning in different cultural contexts, cannot be easily assessed using traditional methods. So instead of that, it should be seen as a long-term educational goal rather than a measurable skills. And in multilingual assessment is a way of evaluating students by considering all the languages they know and they use. So since language and culture are deeply connected, in multilingual assessment, it also involves multicultural functioning, meaning it reflects to how students interact with different people from different cultures and how they see or how they approach different cultural perspective in addition to different languages. So with this, there are two key aspects of multilingual assessment. So first, we have the multiple languages in assessment, and second, the multilingual performance in practice. So multiple languages in assessment is where the student is allowed to use different language in different sections of the test, but each language is tested independently. So example, student taking a test in both English and Spanish, where their performance in each language is evaluated separately. While the multilingual performance in practice is a test that evaluates students use multiple languages together as they do in real life. So this considers a code switching, switching between languages, translation skills, and language mediation. So example, a student explaining a science concept in both English and their native language to ensure that they fully express their understanding. So having that switching would let the students deepen their knowledge about that specific matter or subject matter. Multilingual assessment matters. Yes, because assessing culture and language together is still a complex challenge, especially in multilingual and multicultural contexts. So, multilingual assessment matters because the use of multiple languages can actually demonstrate knowledge in subjects like math or science. It will help them deepen their knowledge about it and then communicate. They could be able to communicate effectively across different languages and different cultures, especially in a real life situation. And lastly, it will help them apply the intercultural skills such as adapting to new cultural settings and understanding different perspectives. Conclusion. Assessing students' content knowledge and language proficiency is interconnected as this provides a new knowledge to the learners. Content knowledge refers to the understanding of a specific subject matter, while language proficiency is the ability to use language, example English, in communication through different contexts. This is crucial as this enhances the learner's ability to acquire and apply. And culture and language assessment, it provides an information that culture and language use are deeply connected. This will help the individual develops an awareness and respect despite the differences of language and cultures. So that would be all for my discussion. I hope you learned something and enjoy. So here's the reference. That would be all. Thank you.